Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Nevers Season 1, Episode 6. It's called True. So full spoilers for the episode, and this one essentially acts as a finale to the season. And having now watched this episode, I suspect that they will just call whatever comes next Season 2. They won't do like a Season 1 Part 2 or a here's the rest of Season 1. I think they'll just kind of do like a Breaking Bad thing where Season 1 just ended up being short. It didn't get to the end of what was planned as a story, but that's not a big deal in the long run once the show gets going again. But having said that, it does work reasonably well as a good episode to leave on. It didn't feel like a finale, but it did feel like that big important episode in the middle of a season that really sort of recontextualizes things, and it gives so much mythology that it's hard not to feel like you've been satisfied with the amount you got. And I will say up front, I do think this is the best episode the show's had. I think a lot of the ideas introduced are mostly really great. I'm not going to say it's a perfect episode. I've got a couple of nitpicks, but it was big, it was bold, it introduced a lot of ideas that finally took it away from one of the things I'd been saying in those first 3 or 4 episodes, which was just how much it feels like it's just an X-Men knockoff in Victorian London. And I realize as I say that, because we're about to start talking about time travel in the future and all this stuff, and I realize that X-Men does have stories that involve those things, most of which I've not read or whatever, but regardless of that still being a fair comparison in a lot of ways, I think this episode made it feel different. It made it feel like instead of being, just the status quo where we're doing the typical orphanage X-Men style with powers and whatnot, this made it feel like it's a part of a grand story that's playing out over however many seasons it's going to be. This feels like there's a game plan. It feels like this is a sci-fi epic that's going to take place, and this was kind of the first real reveal of the building block of what the real themes of the show are and what the real makeup of the show is, because this is one of these episodes early on in the show where you go, oh, now I know what this show is. Before we thought it was this one thing, but we kind of knew it wasn't all of it. We knew there was something they were holding back that really was the show, and this is it. This episode doesn't answer everything. There's still things to explore. There's still, I'm sure, swerves to come and other things, but I feel like after this episode we have a nice fundamental understanding of what the show is, what the conflict is, and what we've got to be excited about going forward. So yeah, good stuff. I've been questioning, the one big thing that I did cling on to, obviously I've been enjoying Penance a lot, I've been enjoying Monday a lot, and the one thing outside of those 2 characters that I really latched onto was the end of episode 4 was the message that Amalia got that made her very emotional. And that made me excited because I felt something from that. I felt the emotion from her, and I felt like, oh, there's more to who she is. And I speculated, is she an alien? Is she either just taking over someone's body? Is she sharing the body with the original person? And it wasn't quite right, but I definitely was thinking, in the various direction that we were kind of getting to with this episode. And I found a lot of those answers to be very satisfying. It did a lot of great things in this that I actually recognize. Fair enough, the first thing this episode made me think of, because it starts very bold by just going straight to this scene in the future that's, post-apocalyptic, dystopian, whatever you want to call it, and there's fighting going on, very Terminator futuresque, no robots necessarily, but still. And it made me think of Dollhouse. It made me feel like the first 20 minutes of this episode, which is split into, parts, it made me feel like this idea that Whedon had for Dollhouse is something that he was really into, but it got a little bit truncated and maybe not, it didn't get to do everything that he wanted to with the concept in Dollhouse, because Dollhouse was kind of shortened and squeezed into 2 seasons, and it was ended very abruptly. And I generally feel that part of the genesis of this show might be to actually use some of the ideas and concepts, but do them properly, do them in a way that makes more sense, or just is more, what the original intention was, or at the very least just explore them again and do more with them, because they didn't get much of a chance before. And it's very bittersweet. I mean, when I started the review of the first episode of this, I said how the show was a very bittersweet thing, because I had wanted a Whedon show for a long time, and it comes after everything that has went down with the revealing of what he's like behind the scenes, and it's I almost get a repeat of that feeling here with episode 6, because this was the episode that kind of showed that there is a game plan here and that there was no reason to worry, and things are really starting to fall into place on a conceptual level where I'm being more excited about what the show is doing. The characters are growing on me. I think this did wonders for Amalia, although I'm not going to be calling her that for much longer. I'll be switching to a different name in a minute. So, and it was good that I got so excited by this episode, even though it didn't have the two characters that were kind of starting to emerge as being the front runners of being the stronger characters, which is Penance and Monday. So that's really good. So the fact that it was able to do that with no Monday and almost no Penance, there's a little bit over towards the end, but that is great, and I think it strengthened some of the things that came before as well. I'll say that. So there's a lot to get into with this episode, so I'm about to dive into it. I will say it's still not perfect. I still have some lingering concerns of like just some of the general, Victorian plots that kind of bore me a little bit, especially now that we've introduced far more interesting things going on and what's really happening with a bunch of the characters and all the rest of it. And it actually, what happens in this episode actually explains a couple of things from previous episodes. And I didn't really bring it up. I think I brought up the joke in the review. I don't know if I brought up the other thought I had with the joke, though, is that although I didn't think it was a sign, I just thought it was like a weird bit of writing. I remember having the thought when Penance builds the thing that she doesn't want to call an amplifier, but True's like, you just invented the amplifier. I thought that was a weird bit of dialogue, but my thought wasn't that why does she know what an amplifier is? My thought was, oh, they have amplifiers in some form already. I thought there was already some sort of... I thought the joke, other than the name, was that amplifiers in some kind of early form did exist already. And when she says, oh, you invented the amplifier, I thought the joke was, oh, this is a thing. It's just a souped up version of something we already kind of have, although obviously a much early version compared to what we're all used to. Looking back on that joke, I'm kind of realizing, oh, the joke isn't that. The joke is that she has just invented the amplifier, and that True has the word for it because she knows what an amplifier is. So there's still some lingering little concerns, but I have to admit, this episode did wonders. This was the episode that kind of really, again, like I said, lets us know what the show actually is. And enriches some of the things we've seen already because of that. So, yeah, so we could take it in parts, I guess, because that's the way the episode sort of structures it, but we're in the future and we learn of this war. I can't remember the acronym for the I don't know, the pro aliens, but the good guys, as it were. But we have also Free Life, I think was the name of the kind of the more villainous side, who are against aliens, and the war seems to be about whether or not the Gallanthy, which is the aliens, whether or not we will accept help from them. And one side is very anti that, and one side is, for that. And it's very sympathetic on the side for that, partly because it comes from a less hateful place to begin with. But as we learn about the Gallanthy, we find out that it has like bonds with, the people it surrounds itself with. It has sympathy and, more importantly, an empathy. And we find out one of the things that the bad guys did in the future is that they actually murder the scientists who were working peacefully with the Gallanthy, because that would torture the Gallanthy. So really vicious stuff there. But again, all of this is like information. If I have a complaint about this early part of the episode, is that it probably does throw around far too many new terms. That like I enjoy when they drop a new name for something and we're sort of figuring out what each of these things means. But they some of the early dialogue was so quick and they were dropping these terms that I actually felt like I didn't know what they were talking about at a couple of points, and it kind of it became a bit clearer as it went on, and I'm sure some of these terms are going to clear up as time does go on, and we maybe get more scenes. Maybe we'll get some flashbacks for Zephyr, but interesting stuff. And I think what's really neat about this is obviously Zephyr who we don't know her name till the end of the episode, because in the future, revealing your name is kind of a big deal, and you don't really do it. But what's very interesting is that the parallel, of course, between True, and now I'm just going to call it Zephyr, the parallel between Zephyr and Penance, with Zephyr and this character who we don't only know for a few, scenes, really. I think Knitter was her name, just glancing at IMDb. But she is hopeful. She is the Penance of the future. She is the one who wants to believe that they can change things, that there is a hope, and doesn't just believe that it's all doomed. And partly because she actually was born into the other side of the conflict and in change, because, the idea, I think the sentence she says is that, it's funny how society can change or can all come down based on a simple question, or a gentle question was it, and the gentle question being, can we do better, I guess. Maybe there's more to that, but I was really into these scenes. Claudia Black, who of course is a sci-fi bit of royalty, I suppose. I've never seen Farscape, but I know she's very loved in that. I do enjoy her stuff. I enjoyed her in Pitch Black, and then of course I know her voice work from the Uncharted games. So I do like Claudia Black. I even recognize her at first because she's got the different hair color now. I don't want to say she's looking old, but she does look different. She doesn't have the black hair, the signature dark hair that she had before. And she's doing an accent. She's doing an American accent, which I thought was a little bit strong. I kind of appreciate it as the episode went on, though, because once we had to hear it come out of someone else's mouth to indicate that it was the same person, I kind of appreciate just how harsh it was as an accent. And that might have even been intentional, even though it's a little fake sounding, just to make it really distinct and clear when it's passed on to someone else. But yeah, so a lot of stuff here. We have this southern guy who's the head of this free life group, not the head of the whole organization, but the head of this squad, who they end up sort of getting the upper hand on, and they have him captive down in this lab because they know there's a Galante here, and they're very distressed when they discover that there's a portal. The Galante has made a portal, and that calls into question the hope and the faith that the future Penance has, where she is very hopeful and she makes this grand speech to Zephyr, but when she finds out that the Galante might be running away, effectively, our hope is called into question. And it leads to the great scene where when the shootout happens because the one guy is convinced by the southern guy to let him out, and there's a gunfight, and a lot of them die, and future Penance gets shot. She's lying there, and Zephyr, who has been inspired by her to feel something and not be completely jaded and without hope, says, "No, you've inspired me. I hope. Do not die, feeling like I did. Maybe the Galante's just going back to get help, to bring the reserves." In fact, I know what it is. I think she says so. And it's this sweet thing, and she says, "Do you want me to tell me your name?" And she dies before she can. And it kind of so I think the end of the episode really is a wonderful bookend to this, because she chooses to give Penance a real name as Zephyr. So all that stuff is wonderful. There's so much mythology going here. I don't necessarily understand every little detail of it. The idea that she, seemingly this being goes back in time, assuming it's the exact same one that's in the cave, but I expect it is, because, or at least Zephyr thinks it is, because she she cracks a joke when she sees it again about how, oh, all this time you're still in the goddamn ceiling, kind of thing. But Zephyr seemingly tries to commit suicide, which kind of is almost symbolically links her to Molly in some ways. But she drinks something that I don't think you're meant to drink. But then the lights come out of her, and it almost creates. It looks like it creates the ship. It looks like the lights create the ship that we saw flying overhead. It's a very similar shape. And there's so many details that I've probably glossed over here, because this episode was so dense in information and so dense in little things that I wish I could watch it 3 times and take oodles of notes. I just don't have time to. But just little things they were saying to each other. At one point they mentioned that Edinburgh fell and almost no one survived. But seemingly our badass main character did, and it's kind of a hint. It's the sort of thing when you realise that this is who True's been the whole time, that it makes sense. And one of the things that I did love is when we do transition back and seemingly, Zephyr goes into Molly's body after she dies. It's very Travelers in a weird way. While I think the parallels to other stories, and obviously saying that some ideas maybe that weren't fully explored that wanted to be explored in Dollhouse are being used again here in a different way. I think this is accidental and not like a direct inspiration, but in the show Travelers, which is on Netflix, and I highly recommend it, is a wonderful science fiction story about travelers coming from the future. But the way their system works is that they always have to take over a body of someone in the present, but they always pick someone who is about to die so that they're not stealing anyone's life. The idea being that they do save the person technically at the last second so they could have got a body to use, but the idea is they're not altering the time that person had originally. So, that's the moral, sort of the ethical way of doing it effectively. And I like that here the same thing kind of happens with Zephyr, where she goes into Molly's body and takes over. And Molly's story is very sad. Molly has a very sad tale of, liking this guy. She works at a bakery, but she's basically told that she's losing her job because the owner's daughter is, old enough now to start working for free, which I'm sure is very realistic in all the time. And she ends up marrying this big douchebag who is very unlikable from the second we meet him. He's even more unlikable when he gives her shit for having 2 miscarriages. She has to take care of his dying mother, or his sick mother, after he unexpectedly passes away. And her life is miserable. And the one man that she did kind of have a crush on, that seemed like a sweet guy that she might want to, go after, he's now got a wife and children of his own, and she, goes to commit suicide. And one of the details here that really infuriated me was the owner of the bakery. The worst thing she does is not fire her. That is not the worst thing she does. The worst thing she does is offer the advice of, oh, you shouldn't go after that pretty boy. He's not rich enough to have a wife. You should go after this other big idiot, this big asshole, because he has a little bit of money, and you should think about your future. And then all of her life is miserable from that point on, because she takes that advice. It's a dire existence. And then, after her husband has died, and she goes back to the bakery, because she still does some delivery work for it. It's not she doesn't completely lose her job, but she makes a fraction of what she did before, it seems to be. And this woman, the bakery woman, tells her of, that guy you like's back in town, he's got a wife, and all that. You should have went after him. I always told you to, because he was always going to make it and do good things in this world. You'd have been much happier. I don't think I've ever wanted to reach into a TV screen and slap someone as much as I did about this old nosy cow. I don't know. It really upset me. But yeah, so the poor woman commits suicide. It puts her in a position where she gets to that point. So yeah, and then we have the section of the episode where it is Zephyr with her accent. We have, of course, Laura Donnelly here doing the various accents. And one of the little details that I thought was very, very good is that the accent of Molly before, during that section when she was Molly, is different to the English accent she has as Amalia True. That I think that's a really nice touch, that it's a different English accent. That, she effectively has to teach herself an English accent after she realizes she's stuck here. Because she doesn't realize she's in a different body at first. And she complains about it being smaller, that it's not, in shape, it's not fighting shape. So she has all the mental knowledge of how to fight someone, but her body's not quite what it was. She was a soldier, she trained, she was a tough ass, tough, what's the word? A badass. That's what I'm trying to say. She's a badass. I was just, for some reason, the word bad just escaped me, and I just said ass. Okay, so we see her interact, and she does kind of do Malady dirty. Sarah's the original name, I think, but when the evil American doctor comes around to question things, she kind of, to protect her secret, kind of puts Malady in harm's way. I mean, she doesn't know exactly what the Doctor's going to do, but she does put her right into his lap effectively, and it's it's kind of a dark little like oops a daisy moment that it has come back to in some ways haunt her. So, interesting stuff. I mean, this part of the episode is good, and it does a lot of great things, particularly with Cousins. Like her seeing Cousins for the first time and having the flash forward of them having sex and kind of being caught off guard and all that, and realizing that it's not this Molly who's going to engage in this relationship with Cousins. It's Zephyr who's going to do that. And it's funny because we learn here, I mean, we kind of knew this, I guess, if you really thought about it, but like it's just very blatant here that he was a a practicing doctor before he got these powers, which makes sense, because he is an actual doctor. Like, because I guess back at the start you might have maybe thought, oh, maybe he wasn't a doctor, but once he got these powers, he's kind of become an unofficial doctor. But no, he is a practicing doctor. He was already doing it, and he gets these powers, and it immediately sort of goes, oh, that's interesting. And this episode does kind of raise the or confirm the idea, not raise the idea, because the idea's been kind of there. We saw with Penance, with her like fixing the well, or the water pump or whatever it was back in episode 1. The idea that this doctor got healing powers, Augie seemingly liking birds and then getting the bird power, the bird power. What else do you call it? Aviation avatar. I don't know what you call them, but this idea that the powers are not random, that they are designed out of what someone's traits and strengths already are. That's a very interesting idea, I think. And even something that's mentioned here is like there may be, because I don't know if we see any men in the future with powers, and it seems to be that that's still kind of like, yeah, it tends to be more women than men, and maybe that's a change now that's been made. That this being, this Galanthe has made this choice, and maybe the reason why the Galanthe's in a cocoon effectively is because maybe it takes a lot out of the Galanthe to distribute all these powers and distribute all this stuff. But it did send a message through Mary, to Zephyr, and I really like that scene when she got that message, and I think this episode fulfills like my imagination, fulfills what I felt from that moment. I really loved the story here of who, at first we would refer to as Stripe. I've not even said Stripe yet, I don't think, but because I'm just calling her Zephyr, but, she's a Stripe, so they just keep calling her Stripe. And then she becomes, Molly, and then eventually reveals that she's Zephyr. And I think that story is really good. Her effectively becoming this person who looks out for the other touched and, like, calms them down, because she's in a hospital, she's in a mental hospital. Some people act out, and she's able to sort of calm them down and help them deal with their powers, and effectively start doing what she ultimately is going to become at the orphanage. But there's a neat little touch here where she's sort of looking for someone specific. She says that there's always like certain people who get empathy or get powers that can help guide the movement. They can help guide the people who are fighting on her side. And there should be someone here to help guide everyone through what's going to happen now. And Cousins just kind of looks at her like, isn't that you? Like, you've been brought back here from the future, so you say. I mean, he's still not quite believing 100%, but he's just got magic powers, so he's open to the idea. He's open to the idea. And it kind of explains why last episode they were so coy and like dodging everything, because they wanted to have all of it be in this episode, and I get that. It did make for a slightly jarring experience going from 4 to 5, but 6 was a very fulfilling narrative because of that, I think. So a lot of wonderful ideas here. Realizing that she is the one who is going to guide everyone now, that maybe she has become someone because of the interactions with future Penance, and now Penance herself there to sort of guide her, and that's why she's maybe important to her. Beyond the intention of the Galanthe, is there also a little bit of fate of like who's meeting up with who? Yeah, sure, the Galanthe like enhances the traits of people, but did it really bring certain people together? I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I mean, obviously, it did sort of, all the touched people did kind of like get attracted together once they were touched, but and we know that like not everyone who gets touched by the spores, because that was something else that was been thrown around, is that she was calling future Penance a spore, late in the or early in the episode, I should say. So lots of interesting terminology going on here. Lots of big ideas. And the Galanthe did seem very friendly when we saw that, short clip of the scientist, talking about the research. Yeah, it seemed quite playful. It was kind of like a big, I don't know, horse or something, lunging around, and it was kind of sweet, all things considered. But yeah, we get to the juicy stuff, of course, is that Bedloe shows up and says, hey, you wanted to not get let out. You had your meeting, your parole hearing, effectively, and you kind of sabotaged it in a way, because you're looking after people who are here, and you're kind of sticking to that. How about we do that in a better way, effectively, is the ultimate point of the scene. And she gets this new orphanage location, and there's a little joke about how, the first person she's got to work with is some Irish girl. She doesn't get her name right. And this is all, good setup stuff. And from here, we jump straight to the other side of what last episode had. It doesn't go into it as, as depthly. Like, they're already mid-fight when we jump to them, but we don't need to necessarily get the start of the fight. The important part is, of course, is Zephyr getting to the Galanthe, and what the interaction and what the information and what that moment is. She wants guidance, she wants a direction, she wants these things. And she talks about this. She lets it out that the people who have died. She says it should have been her. It should have been future Penance that came back, not her, because she was the one that was right for this. And she asks for help, and it does eventually hit her with a bunch of flashes. And I feel like we could sit and comb through these, like, frame by frame, and talk about things. But here's some interesting. But we see Masson with a gun. We see a lot of the Beggar King in here, which I did like, just because it feels like, okay, because right now he feels like a very separate thing that's just there in the world, and he's a kind of a plot device in a lot of ways for like the various things that other characters are using him for right now. I like the idea that there is a direction where ultimately he's going to be more important, but very curious though is a woman's voice. Now, it's a woman's voice. I think that's important. I think it's a woman. Now, it does mean that it's a woman that we're seeing. Now, obviously, Zephyr comes back and goes into Molly's body. There's every possibility that a man could have came back and went into a woman's body in, Victorian times. That's possible, but that doesn't really make a difference in the sense that, well, we know there's a... we know it's a woman in the context of the main part of the story so far. So what I'm saying is the voice says, you're not the only one who hitched the ride. So someone else came back from the future. Whoever that is in a woman's body. So if it's someone we've already met and know, then it's a woman. So that doesn't necessarily mean they started off as a woman in the future, though. Like, that's the point I'm trying to make. I'm going about it in a weird roundabout way. So some of the ideas here for this, I mean, Bedloe is a very obvious one. Bedloe has a lot of motives that we don't understand yet, because she did both help set up the orphanage, but also is working with evil scientist man to do something to the Galanthe. So that's important, and that's a big deal. So that would maybe help explain, depending on who she is from the future. So that could be a thing. There's the hidden person that's been held captive in Masson's basement. I was thinking that was just a touched person before, but maybe it's something more than that. Maybe it's someone from the future. I don't think it's Malady. I think Malady's too, one, an obvious character to do something like that with, but also I think it would cheapen it a little bit. I don't think Masson's from the future. Like I said, it's a woman's voice, but I think he's an obvious one to go to. I think the idea that the southern guy from the future goes into Masson's a really obvious link to try and make, because he's effectively that, the future version of Masson in a lot of ways. So I don't think that's the case. I think that's just important to acknowledge that. Yeah, a lot of potential there. A lot of potential there that's going to keep us thinking and guessing as to who it could be. Someone from the opposing side you would expect to make things super juicy and interesting. But there's some other stuff we see in there. And the most notable thing right at the end of it, because it starts off showing the history, then goes through the present day stuff, and then it shows some quick flashes of the future. They're a bit more vague and ambiguous. But the final one, and it took me a second to realize who it was, but it's Myrtle. It's the girl who can understand every language, but is just can't speak them properly. Just blurts out, fragments of different languages. She says in perfect English, and might I add, she also looks like she's dressed up for like a fancy ball or something like that. She's got the big gown on and like makeup, and her hair's all done up. So very different to how she typically looks right now. And she says in perfect English, and I'm probably paraphrasing this actually because memory, but this is a long way away from that small cave. You're going to have to forget this or forget this one, which to me said that last thing that we see, the Myrtle part, that last part, Zephyr doesn't remember that, and I could be wrong. Maybe she'll mention it next episode, and she did see it, or she did remember it. More importantly, but to me, that's what I took that to mean, is that this was one vision too much. And it was like, oh, wait, you shouldn't see this because this is beyond what I want to show you right now. Or this is too far gone and not relevant yet. Whatever. So that is super interesting. Does it imply that Myrtle is more important in some way? Is it just using Myrtle as an avatar because she kind of is almost a symbol for like communication and like translation? There's different ways we could take that, I think. What I will say though is that perhaps the most interesting scene to me, even though arguably the tease that someone else came from the future, and this weird Myrtle thing at the end where she's like standing in space, are very hypnotic and very like tantalizing from plot ideas. The beat that I've left till last out of this little chunk that I think is the most important is where we get a flashback to the scene where she tells Penance, where Zephyr tells Penance, because I theorized last episode that scene had to take place, that she seems to have told at least some people about what's really going on, to some extent at the very least. And it's true, it turns out she did tell Penance seemingly the gist of everything. She seems to be in on it. And we get Penance's reaction to this. We get Penance being in kind of shock and a little disheartened that the future is such a dark place and that this war is still going on. A war, might I add, that I think is very intricately woven into the themes of the show. I love that if you go back to episode 1, that speech that Masson gives about, someone starting a war, someone's someone stabbed our society, we just have to find out who's thrusting the knife. The idea that Masson is creating effectively the group, the free life movement. And I'm not saying that he literally creates that group. I'm saying that he spiritually is starting that in a different time period. Whether or not his way of thinking is literally what leads to that exact group in the future. The point is that this conflict where shall we trust this alien entity and let them improve our way of living and our world and our society, or will we resist it because it challenges a lot of the systems we have in place, the preconceived notions. It's hard not to just sort of take this and look at the theme of the show as a theme about progression and conservatism, and the people who are in charge wanting to maintain their power and not wanting everyone else to get their own version of power, and letting society to improve in some ways is like letting them have that power. I'm kind of a little political here with the analysis, but ultimately I think that's kind of the thrust of the themes of the show, and to deny that would be kind of ignoring the obvious themes of the show. So that is good stuff, but I do like that effectively that conflict was starting to form. These two factions were starting to form in our main timeline in the show. And now that we've seen the context of the future where there are these two factions and it is this war and it is going down like this and it is created this, cataclysmic war in the future, that recontextualizes what we've already seen with Masson and what we've already seen with this sentiment that's starting to grow, and that we're at the genesis of it. I think that enriches a lot of that really well. But what I really like about this scene, though, Penance finding all this out, and Zephyr kind of questioning, like, you know, is this broken you? Should I not have told you this? And Penance says that well, no, I mean, it's the future, but it doesn't mean it has to happen. You know, we can fix it. You know, classic time travel stuff. You know, there is no fate but what we make. You know, Terminator. You know, some of the best stuff ever made. But ultimately says, you know, we you know, we'll never know if, you know, if we stopped it or if we did enough or if whatever. But, you know, we can try, and I have this gift, and now I have this burden to try and fight with it. And it really clicked for me because obviously the show was called The Nevers, and it's one of those things where you don't necessarily know right away, because you could have called this show The Touched, right? Which would have made sense from episode 1, because the title The Nevers didn't necessarily mean that much yet. And I think this scene really painted, I think, if I'm going to make a bold prediction of the show overall, and I know it's weird to say, I'm going to predict the end of the show. I'm not going to predict any specifics, but I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say that on some level the good guys are going to win by the end, okay? Let's just assume that. What she says here, she uses the word never in her sentence. Admittedly, she says that, you know, we'll never know if we succeed. I think that is thematically very important. The idea that, what is a never? A never is, you know, is something that you just have to take on faith for a start. But I think the other idea here that fits into the time travel is that if they do change the future, if they stop this war from happening, and reality or the future is reset into effectively, I guess, like normal, you know, present day, right? Effectively creating what our actual present day is. Now, having said that, I don't know when the future stuff is set. That might be further ahead in the future. Maybe our present day still does exist, and then this future happens later. We don't actually know, I don't think, unless there was a hint towards what time period it was that I didn't catch. But the idea being that if they do change things, then the Nevers is literally like all of that. You know, it'll never happen. And that kind of like gets us to the title of the show, is that ultimately it's about creating a new version of the world where all of this didn't have to happen. All these people who suffered this war that happens in the future, it never happened. They are the Nevers. Hence the title. I mean, I'm going on 6 episodes, and mostly off this one episode. There's so much that could happen and change my ideas and challenge those theories, but I just, you know, it was this thing that hit me as I'm watching this scene. I'm like, whether it's literally that in a time travel sense where they stop things from happening so they never happened, or it's just about the uncertainty of never knowing that you made the difference but you hope you did, and therein lies the heart. Either way, or in both ways, I think, you know, it could, you know, the title relates to both potentially. I think that's kind of great, and it makes me like the title way more. I was never that into the title. It sounded like, oh, the Nevers, it sounds fine, whatever. Now that I have some context for why it's called the Nevers, all of a sudden I like the title way more, and it has meaning now. So that's great. I should also mention in the future stuff at the start, they did find like a safe or like a cabinet full of like Victorian stuff, which definitely implies that this time period in the context of researching the Galanthe was already important. Which leads us to a lot of things. You know, I said earlier that we assume it's the same Galanthe that came back in time with Zephyr, but we don't really know that. In fact, if anything, I'm even more inclined to think that the Galanthe didn't go back in time, but the Galanthe in the future is the one that hatches from this, but the Galanthe's mind works differently, and like time is not like the same idea that it is to us. In fact, I would even pose the idea, like, is this the first time this has happened? Like, how many cycles of time have this went through trying to like solve this problem? Because the Victorian stuff being in the safe, or being in that, you know, that office room where they're studying the Galanthe, that being there implies that a lot of stuff relevant to the Galanthe already happened in this time period, and therefore maybe they always sent someone back, or they always sent Zephyr back, and they're in a loop, they're in a cycle, and maybe the show's going to be about breaking that cycle and finally winning and finally changing things. Maybe to change things you have to go through the cycle, because it's a little by little, and each cycle things get a bit closer, kind of thing. Again, assuming there's ultimately a happy ending by the very, very, very end, or at least a hopeful one. So I think that's a really fascinating idea. Like this really opened the box. The Pandora's box of ideas really just came flying open with a lot of the stuff that this episode did. And there's thoughts I had during the episode that I don't think I've even brought up, because there was so much happening so quickly. There was so many little details, especially in the future section, especially in this section where she gets the visions from the Galanthe and then fights a bunch of those steampunk cyborg things, which I still love. I also love her gas mask, by the way. Penance made her like a steampunk looking gas mask that has like a big sort of like glass like chamber, not glass actually, more pottery, but like it's just this big chamber thing in the side of the mask. I just thought it was cool. Look, I dig this stuff. That's like, I'm so much more invested into just the concepts of the show and what it's doing. I don't love every character, and I still don't necessarily love everything that we're going to do, spending time with Swan or Stupid Sex Club or whatever. And Bidlow's still a little like, obviously I'm interested in finding out what her motivations are, but right now I wouldn't say I'm like attached or invested in her. I'm curious because I'm assuming that it's going to make me invested when I find out more about her. Right now, like if there's a critique of this show, across the 6-episode mini season that we got, that my critique would probably be that the desire to withhold a lot of what the show is so they could have this great blowout episode that reveals a bunch of stuff, while very commendable, I don't know if the period of time where they had to hold so much back was able to sustain based on its vanilla premise, right? I think it felt like elements were missing, and the mystery wasn't captivating enough. At least not until the end of episode 4. I think that's where it started to really start. I started to feel a spark. I started to feel something there. I think that's maybe a critique, because other shows have done this where the show will be solid and interesting and a fun premise, but then you'll have the episode either halfway through the season, the end of the first season, maybe even later in some cases, where it really becomes the show it becomes. And I think some shows have definitely handled it better, where they make the show that we start with work on its own first, before we blow it wide open. And I think maybe I felt some of the lack of what was going on beforehand. I could feel the absence in some ways. So I think that's a fair critique, but it was gradually improving, and this episode was the capper of that. So I should mention the ending, where they come back and it's the two sides meet again, back at the base, back at the orphanage, and Zephyr tells Penance her name right at the very, very end, but says, no, we should probably tell them. It feels like it's time. We have to actually tell them the what this is, what the conflict is, what's coming, and what we're going to have to do to fight it, because clearly things are ramping up. And yeah, all that stuff, and I think Zephyr finding a little bit of hope again. Maybe she found that enough before, and hell, even the Zephyr cousins relationship has benefited from this episode, because in some ways he was the first person who kind of looked to her as the one who was there to guide them, and as the one who he sought comfort in her to understand what was happening to him, and she was the first person that he was the first person that she really truly confided in. So all of a sudden, why she feels attached to him and why she does kind of fight for their relationship, if you want to call it that, maybe romantic attachment or whatever, like their bond, their connection, she's fighting for because it means a lot to her. And I understand why it does mean a lot to her now, because before the relationship was just kind of like, okay, this is here. I didn't necessarily feel anything from it as of yet, and all of a sudden it has some context that really, it doesn't make it the best romance of all time as of right now, but it gives it something. And all of a sudden, a lot of the pieces of the show that weren't clicking before are clicking a little bit better. Not every one of them, but a lot of them. So yeah, and openly talking about the future and openly talking about what this is really about. I think it's going to be fun. I can't wait to have other characters openly talking about where we're going in the future now and what they think about that. How does Augie react to that? Like how do some of these other characters react to that? And actually, just speaking of other characters, if all of the powers come from something that the people had already, right? Part of their personality or part of their skills, then I have to question, Lucy's power, where her strength killed her baby. It really makes me question, what part of her, manifested into that power. I think that's kind of interesting. It may be something we can start to question about some of these other characters is why did this manifest in them? I think that's super interesting. So it was really good. I'm a little bit, speechless, I guess. I mean, not really. I just spoke for 40 minutes, but so I'm trying to sum up the overall thing that this episode does, and hopefully I've conveyed that over the last 40 or so minutes. But it really is a kind of a game changer of an episode where this is the one where I say, and it's hard to say this, because obviously hindsight's a big thing, and of course maybe the show will crash and burn because we're going to have a different showrunner from this point on. It does very much feel like there was a game plan, and the game plan will probably have to be stuck to at least for a while. And as long as that framework's there, I think it should be fine. But this is the moment in the show where if you're trying to introduce someone to this show later when you know it's worth watching, like this is the episode where you say, no, you have to get to episode 6. Get to episode 6, and if you don't like episode 6, you can give up. You can yeah. I'm fine with it because you clearly you're not into what this show has to offer you. But this does feel like that game-changing episode where this is the one you have to get to realize if you like it or not. And I think I've been definitely growing on it, but this is I will say after this episode I like this show, and I'm looking forward to more. And hopefully they can continue this feeling and stick the landings and all the rest of it. And I'm sure I've not talked about a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about, but the added meaning behind the title, the idea of like future penance and how that thematically kind of like nicely parallels, regular penance. The possibilities of who this other time traveler is. All these other things. Why did it pick Zephyr to send her back over the? There's a lot of really interesting stuff, and elements that I've probably not even spoken about because there's so much to grasp onto in this episode, but. I think you can tell this is by far the most passionate I have been with this show because, because I've sat here for so long, but I had a different feeling come into this conversation. I think some of the shows that I struggle sometimes to talk about is because I'll watch the episode, I'll get to the end, and I'm like, oh yeah, I was okay, and there's some good things, some bad things, and these reviews, and while technically a review in a traditional sense is to determine if something good or bad. When you're talking about like serialized TV, you're not really here for should you watch the show or not past episode 1 typically. You're more here for, okay, more things have happened in the serialized story, these are developments, let's analyze, let's talk about, like, this. It's not necessarily a good or bad sort of thing. So inherently these things, these reviews that we do, these after shows, these, whatever you want to call them, these analysis, recaps, blah blah blah, whatever words you want to throw into all these types of videos, they are so much more easy to record when I feel passion, when there's some passionate feelings after the episode, because I'm excited to talk about it, I'm excited to go through it, and not every episode can be that. And some shows, the reason why some shows get dropped is because I realize over time that there's almost no episodes for a long time that make me feel that way. And I'm kind of having to, force it a little bit or whatever. And you stick it out with some shows because you feel that there's potential to get to that point, and it's nice to kind of be rewarded a little bit for that. So I'm happy to say that I feel very excited about this show. and where it can go now. Again, don't love every single small thing about the show. I don't love every detail. There's still things to iron out. But I think the core of the show, the core, the skeleton, the heart, the organs, whatever part of the body you want to compare it to, I think we kind of have that now. We have that kind of in place. We had the heart with Penance, but now we have more of the body. My metaphor is losing track. I'm also very hungry now. I've been speaking for so long that I am now really going to go and have some dinner. But that is my thoughts, my very scattered and very poorly developed thoughts on The Nevers episode 6. Very good stuff. Best the show's had yet, and now the concepts are really starting to feel exciting, and you can't really ask for more at this point. And a show that's been, a little bit more on the mixed side, with some signs of quality, but cool. And hopefully this is a start that, and if we get seasons and seasons of this, maybe in like 3 seasons times we'll never remember what we felt in those first few episodes, or what I felt at least. I won't speak for everyone, but there you go. That's the Nevers. There's episode 6. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Very, very important. All those things help us out on YouTube, because those are the things that the YouTube keep metrics on, and then they'll share me out to more people. They'll share the channel out to more people. So please hit those buttons. You can support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and help keep all the content coming. You get some bonuses for your trouble, so go have a look, see if you're interested. But yeah, Nevers episode 6 was very good, and I'm excited for more, whenever it may be. Hopefully not too long, hopefully, because presumably they had the rest of season 1 written at the very least, so there's probably a good game plan in place for at least the first half of the next season. So maybe they'll get to it quicker than later, hopefully. So, but that's me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?